It is 8:26 across the country. Now, over 100 local authorities in England have been given a share of £20 million to keep their swimming pools and leisure centres open. It's part of a plan to get 3 million people active by 2030 and lift leisure centres out of rising operational costs. Let's talk to Huw Edwards, the CEO of ukactive. That's the leisure centre industry body. Joins me live this Saturday morning. Good to talk to you, Huw.
Good morning.
I remember seeing lots of stories after the pandemic and during COVID about just how expensive it was for leisure centres to run their operational costs, especially pools. So you must be delighted that this investment is coming down the road. Yeah,
there was a big collective lobbying effort from the sector, from Sport England and from the sponsor department in government, DCMS, to secure funding support from the Chancellor in that March budget, as you rightly say. So to see funding getting to the front line is really welcome and much needed. I think, however, we need to balance this good news with the knowledge that the demand for support outstripped available funds, so less than 50% of applicants were successful. And also a big part of the sector, both the private and independent operators, weren't eligible for the funds. So a positive intervention, 100%, but caveated with caution that a good part of facilities across the sector remain fragile, and we know local authorities in pockets across the country continue to have challenging discussions around keeping facilities open.
So those facilities that haven't got a share of this money, what is the challenge they're facing? Is it the operational cost, or is it fewer people coming through their doors to participate?
Well, it's probably much more in the former at this point in time, and we know that the rising cost of living is increasingly making it harder for people to afford to be active. So our own research, for example, is showing that 37% of women say cost of living has had a negative impact on their activity levels. ukactive, the organisation I lead, is bringing out a full analysis later this week on energy crisis covering public and private. And what we will probably see in that analysis that a substantial amount of public sector leisure facilities are continuing at risk of reduced services within the next 6 months. So reduced services will be opening times, pool temperatures and less classes. And also facilities across the sector will work to probably look to increase prices to manage those continued high energy costs, which are still much higher than they were, say, 3 or 4 years ago.
Do you still have major concerns about pools going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's probably 3 areas that we probably need to see support on across gyms, pools and leisure centres as a whole. We know that this part of the sector is one of the major drivers of physical activity in the UK. So the first thing the government can do is really move at pace with the phase 2 of this funding, which is looking at energy efficiency, and also back the work that ukactive has begun with the energy sector and operators to support understanding options for energy cost reduction. The second is where the government has, in its next 2 fiscal announcements, so the autumn statement later this month and the budget in March, is to look at how it can reduce some of those cost pressures that facilities are facing. An example will be to support the continued business rate support that we currently have, which is a freeze on that business rates multiplier and continue that exemption at 75%. But the third big area which the government can do is really support demand and drive greater demand in facilities. We have a health crisis in this country right now. We have huge obesity rates. We have a waiting list approaching 8 million and record levels of people long-term sick. So the government should back the work that ukactive is doing with other leading partners to integrate our members' facilities into the NHS, get people not using the facilities the NHS has as much as it can, and support some of those Prime Minister's pledges around reducing waiting lists and economic growth. So there's a lot that the government can do working with the industry to drive demand and also support those operating costs as well.
You mentioned this, so the immediate relief is 20 million and then there is due to be another 40 million in the future. Am I right in thinking that?
That's correct. And so the industry and our members across the whole country have already looked at how they can reduce their dependency on current energy provision by making those efficiencies. Now, it's a big piece of work that the government needs to do in hand with the industry to support the education, the understanding of the sector about how it starts that journey, looking at net zero, looking at decarbonisation, looking at energy efficiency. That's a big piece of work. But we also know, and partners like Swim England will allude to this, that the estate itself, a lot of swimming pools are well over 20, 25 years old. And so the renewal of those is going to happen at some point. And so there needs to be a really strategic plan about how you get investment, public-private investment into the sector in order to really maintain those services for communities across the country.
Is there willing within the leisure sector to transform sometimes their estate and to kind of think a bit more creatively about how exercise is changing and things can be done on a cheaper running cost?
I think that the sector is always looking at its development opportunities. It's always looking at how it can make greater efficiency savings as it has done over the last 12, 18 months. One of the reasons why we still have facilities open now as opposed to where we were in the start of this crisis about 12 months ago is because of the great work the sector did, public and private, to try and find those reduced energy efficiency costs, but not trying to put the pressure back on the customer. There's more that we can do in terms of looking at renewable energy, looking at net zero, but that needs to be a collaboration and partnership with the government. That second phase funding will be important, but it's much bigger than that in terms of the long-term renewal of the estate, which we'll need to see.
And just finally, if you did have like a carte blanche about how to deal with what you mentioned earlier about the ageing swimming pools, what can be done for those facilities?
Well, we need to have a renewal of the estate, and so we need to be really creative about how we renew those facilities, which will have only a short lifespan remaining, and look at where investment, from probably not from the exchequer because we know what fiscal bind we're in as a country, but look at investment into the sector from different avenues, and look at how we can have long-term relationships across public and private to look at long-term substantial investment into these facilities, that we build new, inclusive and adaptable facilities for the future. But that's going to need a major injection of infrastructure investment. That can happen if there's willing from the government to work with industry at central and work with government at central and local level to make sure that money can come into the sector.
And Huw, we all know how beneficial exercise is, don't we, to not just our physical health, but our mental health as well. And I think swimming sometimes is a little bit underrated.
Well, and there's a huge amount of people across the country who swim from the youngest through to the oldest. It's a massive part of supporting people's physical, mental, social well-being. You know, I see facilities when I go around the country where you see parents and toddlers having their lessons right next to aqua aerobics with older people. You know, it is part of the fabric of communities, and it's really important that we maintain these facilities and then allow them to grow and see that in the context of the health challenges we're facing as a nation, and put these facilities right at the front of driving that preventive agenda for the government. And as I said, the Prime Minister has two pledges: economic growth and waiting lists. And these facilities are directly linked to the success of those two pledges.
Huw, good to talk to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
That is Huw Edwards, the CEO of ukactive, talking about this this immediate relief, £20 million being given to more than 100 local authorities to make a start with helping to keep swimming pools open, helping to keep leisure centres open. But as Huw was saying, a lot more needed. And